Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I had a coffee. It's all that's left because it's all over everything, all over my studio. Still wet. Now, the mice and the keyboards don't work so well when they're soaked in coffee. Just a little life tip, pro tip for everybody. Anyway, I know it took me a while to get started. That's what happened. Anyway, I got an exciting idea to talk about today. But who knows if anyone will join, right? Who knows if anyone will join? If you can hear me, you can just actually say something in the chat. But that would be if people are watching, but no one's watching. So anyway, I got a great thing to talk about today. For whatever reason, now all the graphics are doing something weird. They're doing something weird. I don't know what is happening, but that is what happens when you spill coffee over all your equipment. Things just go a little nuts. But anyway, I've got a great idea to talk about on this Friday, Fact Check Friday, and it comes down to who's telling us things. And today I want to talk about Narrative Envoys. Now, on Wednesday, I talked about narrative collapse, that just people weren't buying the news anymore. But just now, let's see if I got, there we go. Here we go. I saw a story, not just now, so yesterday, but I saw a story. Bob Woodward, he's popped up his head again, saying, watch for a relationship with Putin in Trump's second administration. This sounds like it's big stuff here. Veteran journalist Bob Woodward on Wednesday said the public should watch President-elect Trump's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin closely when Trump returns to the White House in January. It looks like we've got a narrative envoy. And that's the idea. That's the topic that we're going to talk about today. It was kind of fun. I did pop in. I wrote a little paper on it and I popped it into AI, had to make a little podcast. It's pretty good. I'm going to play just a minute or two of it just to get a gist for it as some people gather around. So let's just see if I can actually get that going. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. But I got to put up the audio is created with AI. So let's listen to just a tad of this.
We're diving into some really interesting territory today. We're talking about narrative envoys. It's a term you might not be familiar with, but I guarantee you've seen them in action.
Definitely. The concept really gets at how certain figures in media, journalists and personalities, end up shaping the stories we all believe, especially when big events go down.
Yeah, and it's not always intentional,
right? It's not always some kind of conspiracy. We'll be looking at the work of Tom Coffey. He's the one who really brought this idea of narrative envoys to the forefront. We'll be looking at some very, very relevant examples to illustrate how it all plays out.
Like I said, some really interesting stuff lined up for you all. We're going to unpack how these narrative envoys work, why they matter so much. For one, we're diving into some really interesting...
Well, obviously, I just clicked it to the beginning again. So anyway, let's just get into it, and I'll tell you all about the narrative envoy. Let's see if I can get the right mouse here. There we go. What a day, right? Oh, no. Now I've got that graphic up there. It's not what I wanted. Well, let's clear it out. How do I get rid of that? Get rid of that. Go away. What is that? What is that black box there? There we go. Oh, that's not frustrating. Let's see. Can I? Nope. Okay. All right. Who needs graphics, right? We don't need any. We don't need no stupid graphics, folks. Let's talk about something very relevant, and that's narrative envoys. You know the people, even if you don't know you know them. They're like the squadron of elite propagandists that pop up whenever there's a new talking point fresh out of Washington or Langley or wherever they're sourcing our democracy these days, right? Let's be real. Narrative envoys are the media's special ops team. They aren't the beat reporters covering potholes or water shortages. No, they're the big guns, the ones who drop in when the inside sources and the exclusive access and always seem to be nudging us in one specific direction. They're not here to give us the news. They're here to shepherd us like the hall monitors of acceptable public opinion. And we all know who they are. Remember the Iraq War? Everything's going to shit today. I know, it's a fun memory. The WMDs, we were all so convinced, not me, that Saddam was stockpiling. Where would that story have been without a reliable narrative envoys, eh? The Judith Millers of the world, who were telling us things don't work when you spill coffee on them. No, Judith Millers of the world were there telling us Saddam had bombs ready to blow us up any second, except it turns out the WMDs were as real as Bigfoot. But don't worry, by the time we figured that out, the war was fully stocked, fully funded, and the media had moved on to the next thing. Or take the whole Russiagate thing. For years, you had all these journalists, envoys, who basically turned into the Russia 24/7 channel. Every day was a new bombshell on Trump and Putin, as if they were texting each other heart emojis at night. Now, I'm not saying Russia's harmless, but we had MSNBC turning Vladimir Putin into a Bond villain, and then after years of collusion, what happened? Not much, except everybody that had already bought the story. I can't even read. Not much, except everyone had already bought the story. Because, hey, that was the point, right? It didn't matter if it was true. It just had to be believed. And then there's the Hunter Biden laptop story. A guy brings his laptop into a repair shop, allegedly. It's just full of incriminating emails about him and his dad's business deals. You'd think this is the kind of thing the press lives for, right? A political dynasty on the ropes. No, suddenly every narrative envoy was on it. They declared, nope, not a story, just a Russian plot. Move along, folks. There's nothing to see here. And the amazing thing, a bunch of former intelligence officers joined in too. You had like 50 ex-CIA and NSA folks practically a choir saying, this looks like Russian disinformation. And the media, they parroted every line until everyone stopped talking about the laptop. But here's the kicker. Later, months later, years later, mainstream outlets finally admitted, oh yeah, the laptop's real. And by then, of course, the election was over. The world had moved on. If you bring it up, people look at you like you're still talking about Y2K. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying these narrative envoys are evil. I'm saying they're doing a job, and they do it well. But it's the job that requires them to keep us focused on whatever story benefits the folks signing their checks. And hey, you'd have to be crazy not to follow the money, right? I mean, it pays well to be a narrative envoy. You get the benefits, apartment in DC that only costs you $5,000 a month, and a free pass to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Life is good. It's just whenever there's a big story that doesn't fit the narrative, the ones that should be dug into, we find our narrative envoys just, moving on like an awkward Thanksgiving dinner conversation. So the next time you see one of these envoys pop up with their inside sources and their insider knowledge, remember, it's probably just that, an inside job. And hey, at least we can say we know the game. So grab some popcorn, sit back, enjoy the show. Just don't believe everything you hear. My name's Tom Coffey. This is the Coffee Nuance Show. The most ignored, censored commentary news show live right now. Flame on. Wow. Well, I guess this is what happens when you don't go live when you say you're going to go live. You get nobody watching. Wow. Lesson learned. Lesson learned. I think I need, I should not use this mug. I should have a fall overable. See, there we go. Oh well. Oh well. I think I'm just going to be cleaning my equipment. Hopefully I can figure it all out. Anyway. So I guess let's might as well. I'll just tell you the story anyway. I prepared for the show, and I feel I guess it's not really going well right now. So Bob Woodward popped up, and that's where I came up with this term narrative envoy, because Bob Woodward is definitely that guy. He always pops up when the narrative needs to change, or when we need to look at something else, right? We all respect him, right? He's such a, such a fantastic journalist. He always seems to come up with stories that look like they're right out of the intelligence department. What a shock. Anyway, Woodward's latest book, War, reported new details of Trump's relationship with Putin, including that they spoke by phone 7 times after Trump left office, and that Trump sent Putin COVID-19 testing systems during the pandemic when such equipment was in short supply. This is such a dumb point. This point is so dumb. We weren't so short that you couldn't spare a dozen COVID tests to send to your biggest adversary in the world. Okay? That's what you should do. You should, if you have limited COVID tests and Putin asks you, hey, can I have a couple COVID tests? You send it to him. That's what you do. I don't need a COVID test. You don't need a COVID test. In fact, in hindsight, none of us did. But it was the right thing to send Putin a dozen COVID tests. It's such a stupid point. Anyway, CNN's Anderson Cooper asked Woodward on Wednesday what he made of Trump's victory over Vice President Harris. It's interesting. Anderson Cooper, he's another one of these narrative envoys. Yeah. Didn't he intern at the CIA? Did he intern at the CIA? What are the chances he still has a connection to what's going on there? Anyway, we see the same characters pop up again and again. And that's what I got out of this article about Bob Woodward, who's now popping up to talk about democracy, Trump and Putin. It's so frustrating, but it's so clear to me that that's what Bob Woodward is. The problem is we haven't had a term to label these people. Okay, so I'm labeling Bob Woodward. I'm labeling Anderson Cooper. There's a number of these narrative envoys. That's what they are. They pop up when we need a new narrative. And they often have secret sources, insider information. And the information always seems to line up exactly with what the State Department would like. I mean, 100 out of 100 times. What are the odds? What are the odds? Anyway. So that's the latest. Woodward is popping up talking about Trump's relationship with Putin. I guess they're going to go with that smear, with that story. I don't think it's going to work because I think their narratives are collapsing. But here is Bob Woodward, as if on cue, to rain some propaganda down on the president-elect. Anyway. Anyway, you know what? I'm just going to play this AI-generated podcast. Now, it was made off of an article that I wrote, and so it's just taking things that I wrote and it turned it into a little podcast. I'm just going to play it because nothing else seems to be working today. So let's see if that works.
Interesting territory today. We're talking about narrative envoys. It's a term you might not be familiar with, but I guarantee you've seen them in action.
Definitely. The concept really gets at how certain figures in media, journalists and personalities, end up shaping the stories we all believe, especially when big events go down.
Yeah, and it's not always intentional,
Right? It's not always some kind of conspiracy. We'll be looking at the work of Tom Coffey. He's the one who really brought this idea of narrative envoys to the forefront. We'll be looking at some very, very relevant examples to illustrate how it all plays out.
Like I said, some really interesting stuff lined up for you all. We're going to unpack how these narrative envoys work, why they matter so much for how we make sense of the world.
I mean, we're talking everything from WMDs in Iraq to the whole Hunter Biden laptop situation. How these figures pop up at just the right moment, pushing narratives that, well, often line up with what those in power want us to believe.
Exactly. So first things first, let's break down what Tom Coffey actually means by this term, narrative envoy. He's talking about, well, journalists and media personalities, right? People who have a particular kind of influence over public opinion.
And the key thing is they often have this privileged access to powerful institutions and sources. They're seen as having the inside scoop.
Which makes them seem like authorities, right? Like we should trust what they're saying.
Exactly. Coffey argues that because people see them as authorities, they can make certain versions of events seem more legitimate. They shape how the public sees things, often in a way that benefits those in power.
So it's not just reporting the news, it's about framing it in a particular way, shaping the narrative. It's subtle, but powerful. They become these, well, almost like messengers for these official narratives.
Yeah, exactly. Like emissaries.
Now, to be fair to Coffey, he's not saying that every narrative envoy is out there deliberately pushing an agenda.
No,
But
absolutely.
I think they
Some
are.
might just be caught up in the system. They reward people who stick to the dominant narrative. It's like the path of least resistance in a way.
But even if they aren't doing it intentionally, the impact is still real. They're shaping how we understand the world, whether we realize it or not.
And I think the best way to grasp this whole concept is to, look at some concrete examples. Like, let's take the lead up to the Iraq War back in 2003. It's a classic example of how narratives get shaped.
Okay, so for those who don't remember, the Bush administration was arguing that we needed to invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, WMDs.
Right. And there was this reporter for the New York Times, Judith Miller. She wrote a whole series of articles claiming that, based on her sources within the administration, Iraq had a big, active WMD program.
And a lot of people read those articles. They were influential. It helped convince the public that the war was necessary, created a sense of urgency, like we had to act fast to stop a threat.
And then, as we all know now, no WMDs were ever found in Iraq. Miller's reporting, well, it was discredited. But the damage was done.
Yeah, it shaped how people saw the situation, helped justify a war that, well, many now believe was based on bad intelligence.
Yeah.
It's a powerful example of how much influence narrative envoys can have.
Yeah, and this is where Coffey's idea really gets interesting. He argues that one of their main tactics is relying on these unnamed sources, particularly within intelligence agencies.
So they say things like, sources tell us, but we don't actually know who those sources are.
Exactly. They're using these anonymous sources to make it seem like the information is coming straight from the top, even if it's never actually been verified, maybe even totally inaccurate.
And we as humans, we tend to trust people in positions of power, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to national security and things like that. If it sounds like it's from a credible source, we're more likely to believe it, even if the evidence is weak.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And this kind of leads us to another example that Coffee uses, the whole Russiagate saga that just dominated the news for years.
Oh man, that was a wild time.
Yeah, it really was. And it's a perfect example of how these narrative envoys can shape public perception on a massive scale, even if it turns out they were wrong.
So, for those who might not remember, this was after the 2016 election. There were all these allegations that the Trump campaign had worked with Russia to interfere in the election.
Right. And Coffee points to figures like David Ignatius for the Washington Post and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC as some of the key voices pushing this narrative.
Ignatius, he's got these deep connections in the intelligence community. He wrote a bunch of articles that claimed that there were all these links between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Yeah, and Maddow, on her show every night, she'd go on and on about the latest developments in the Russiagate investigation,
Yeah.
often making it sound like the allegations were already proven facts.
And it wasn't just them, right? There were all these people in the media who were pushing this narrative, often relying on leaks from anonymous sources within the intelligence community.
Now, look, I'm not saying there weren't legitimate concerns about Russian interference in the election, but Coffey's point is that the way certain media figures framed this whole thing went beyond simply reporting on the investigation.
It made people suspicious of Trump and his presidency right from the start. And that had a long-lasting effect, even though the allegations weren't ultimately proven.
Yeah, and even though the Mueller investigation ultimately didn't find enough evidence to say there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, the narrative had already taken root.
People just assumed Trump was guilty, even though the evidence never really added up.
Exactly. And that's a key point Coffey makes. Once these narratives take hold, it's really hard to change people's minds, even when new evidence comes out that contradicts the original story.
It's like we hear something enough times, especially from people we trust, and it just becomes our reality, whether it's true or not.
And this is especially true now with the internet and social media. Information spreads so fast, it can be tough to sort out what's real and what's not.
So anyway, that's a little bit of the little bit of a podcast that was that I had generated with Notebook LM about a paper I wrote on this topic of narrative envoys. So what do you think of that name? Is that a good name or not? I don't know if it's a good name or not. It's hard naming things, but I think that these people should be named. And now that we have an idea for this, I think I want to put together a list and examples of who are the narrative envoys as a cautionary thing that you can look out for when certain people just pop up in the news. Once you realize that that's what they are, I think you'll have a better understanding of how seriously you should take it, and at least being on guard as to what's being pushed. Anyway, I think for fun, that was pretty much the podcast. There's a little bit more. I will post the whole AI podcast that made about the paper I wrote. I'll post it on X here within the next hour if you want to listen to the whole thing. But that's the idea. The idea is that there are these people, and they pop up with special knowledge, and for whatever reason, the rest of the media all, says awesome things about them, right? Like Bob Woodward, he's held in such high regard. And it's great because he can just keep coming out every 6 months or something, anytime they need someone to say something's worse than Watergate, right? They need to say that about Trump about every 6 months or so, that something he's doing is worse than Watergate. And then they'll just have Bob Woodward pop up with to, like, on cue, read his lines. And so right now, he's got a new book, and it's going to be all about how, Trump hearts Putin. So I guess they're going to go with that. I guess, is this going to be Russiagate 2.0? I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I did not expect to spill coffee everywhere. So hopefully everything will still work. I'm still not sure what's going on with the graphics. I'll figure it out, I guess. But stick around for the after show. I'll read through your comments, and hope you all have an awesome weekend. See you then. Peace. Hey, well, hang on. Boom. There we go. Okay, now it's there. Here we go. Okay, that's the black box of anonymity. Could be. What's up, Lucid? I heard an Lucid says, I heard an archaeologist, that's a tricky word, found the tomb of Gilgamesh, and we showed up a month later, took over the dig, and raided all the historical displays, and took only specific items and trashed the rest. I know nothing about that story, so I know so little about that story, I don't even know if that's a joke. How about spill proof? That's what I need. A spill proof. What was I saying rather than spill proof. That's what I need. A spill proof mug. Or maybe I shouldn't be drinking hot coffee around a lot of electronics. It's kind of dumb. You know, how many times do I need to learn this lesson? Probably a couple more times. Don't forget to like the stream. Hoo-ha! Yeah. Let's see. Anything else? Hashtag Rumble Gang. You are the master labeler, Tom. Well, I think it's important to. I have had fun this year just trying to come up with naming things. But if you can label something, then you can recognize it and then you can talk about it. It's hard to talk about an idea that doesn't have a name yet. And so that's the importance of naming things. It'd be very difficult to exist without naming things. And I think, for example, there's probably a good reason that Narrative Envoys has not been named yet by the media, because the media doesn't want you talking about Narrative Envoys, which is why we need to name it or label it. Anyway, that's the best name I could come up with, but if you got a better name, let me know for sure. Coffee argues that coffee and electronics don't mix. That is very true. Natasha says, damn it, Tom, you're going to make me figure out X, aren't you? I really am trying to push people to X, not exclusively, but just to have a social media that you can get to that is uncensored or less censored, right? Obviously, I'm a big fan of YouTube and Rumble. I think they're great, but but I do use X to often define my news. So, yeah, it's crazy how that AI sounds more intelligent than real people. It is crazy. What I think is interesting about the little AI podcast, and I will post that on X. The AI podcast made it about a paper that I wrote, and sometimes it has better points and has an idea I didn't even think of, and they'll use in the podcast a point I didn't even make, and they came up with a good point. I'm like, oh, I should probably be using them to begin with, right? But I'm truly blown away by all these different AIs. I use them for the graphics and for the thumbnail and whatnot, and to make the little podcasts. And I think it's incredible. The podcast I make with a Notebook LM, it's a Google product, and you can just upload information to it, have it make a podcast. The other thing that you could do, though, you can click and it'll make an outline. So let's say you've written an article, you have information. It can just make an outline for you. It can create a quiz. It can create like study questions. Now, the paper I uploaded was, I don't know, maybe 2.5 pages. It wasn't even very long. But, they were able to make like a 12-minute podcast out of it. It's pretty incredible. And yeah, it does sound more intelligent than a lot of real people. And in fact, sometimes it sounds more interesting. I think it's more interesting than I am often. Like, I wish I could sound that interesting. But I think I could probably do it. I need a woman with a nice NPR voice next to me to bounce these ideas off of, and I think we'd have a pretty good show. So anyway, that's all I have for you today. I hope you all have an awesome weekend, and be sure to check out X. I will be posting that AI podcast if you want to check out the whole thing, or at least share it with someone that will not believe that was made with AI. And so that's an example that you can share with anyone that hasn't experienced that yet. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Have an awesome weekend. I'll be back on Monday. Until then, peace.